They taught until the night riders came. We heard shots, then silence. The next morning, the chalkboard still had the lesson written on it, Freedom Lesson 12. The letters were half erased by smoke. Testimony recorded by the Freedmen's Bureau, Lowndes County, Alabama, 1871. This was not written for remembrance. It was written as evidence, a brief line among many without commentary or closure. Yet it lingers. The sound of gunfire against a backdrop of chalk dust. The image of a lesson unfinished. The page remains, but the voices do not. Welcome to a record not found in any textbook, a fragment preserved in field notes and affidavits, a moment caught between learning and survival. The document does not name the teachers. It lists only the number of students, 43, and the words, "School burned, cause unknown." The report ends abruptly, but in the margin another hand has written, "Witnesses state armed teachers present." A note without follow-up, a sentence that never received its answer. For years, the page remained in a box labeled Reconstruction Incidents Miscellaneous. No further investigation. No arrests. The local newspaper mentioned only an unfortunate fire in the colored quarter. The language is detached, sanitized, procedural. Behind it, the silence of what was not written, whose fire, whose fear, whose lives lost between the lines. Other records from that same year repeat the pattern: Perry, Dallas, Wilcox counties. Small schoolhouses raised by freed communities gone overnight. In one, a teacher described as a northern woman of no notable wealth who slept beside her lessons and kept a rifle close at hand. Each story ends the same way: no cause given, no names listed, no graves recorded. The Bureau called them temporary setbacks. The WPA interviews of the 1930s preserve the voices of those who once sat in those classrooms. One student remembered the lady with the light voice who told us to keep reading even if we heard the horses. Another said she kept a pistol wrapped in the lesson papers. The recollections are fragments: Miss C, Miss L, the woman who read Psalms before class. Each one half erased by time, yet refusing to disappear. This story begins where documentation thins out, where history hesitates. Between official silence and remembered fear lies an unrecorded geography of courage. From what remains, a pattern emerges: teachers who carried primers, hymnals, and sometimes rifles. Their classrooms were not sanctuaries, but front lines. Every word spoken a defiance. Every page turned an act of resistance. The records of the Freedmen's Bureau 1870-1873 confirm over 100 schools attacked across Alabama, many rebuilt within months. None rebuilt without fear. Teachers continued to arrive, some armed by local militia, others defended only by the faith of their students. Necessary measures taken for protection. One entry reads, "No emotion, no commentary, only the steady handwriting of bureaucracy recording the persistence of danger." What does it mean to teach under siege? To draw letters on a board while watching the tree line for riders, to hold a book in one hand and a rifle in the other. The archive offers no answer, only the weight of its silence. This is not a monument. It is residue, black ink on brittle paper, smoke stains on pine walls, handwriting that refuses to fade. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you paused. What did you feel in that silence? The testimony known as the Lowndes account first appears in the 1871 correspondence files of the Freedmen's Bureau, held today at the National Archives Record Group 105 Reel 23. It is dated March 11, 1871, signed only with initials TWC, and filed under Educational Incidents, Alabama. The paper is brittle, the ink iron-based and oxidized, typical of Reconstruction-era field reports. The handwriting is steady but terse, a tone used by federal agents describing violence they could neither prevent nor prosecute. This single page would later serve as the foundation for a dozen investigations into the armed teacher phenomenon. Lowndes County in 1871 was an unstable terrain. The black population outnumbered, the white nearly 2-to-1, yet political control had shifted only temporarily. The freedmen's schools were small, often one-room cabins built with volunteer labor from freed families. Each school required bureau approval and was assigned a visiting inspector every quarter. Those inspectors, mostly former Union officers, were often unarmed and traveled alone through rural districts known for night riding and arson. It was under those conditions that TWC collected the testimony of an unnamed witness after the burning of a colored school. The report contains 3 statements, the first describing the fire, the second listing property lost, and the third noting armed teachers present at time of incident. No further context is given. The names of those teachers do not appear in any other document from that month. The Bureau's field ledger for March 1871 lists only education disruption due to hostility. Yet a marginal annotation written in a different hand adds recovered rifle of Northern makes serial illegible. When researchers cross-referenced this entry with Bureau firearms inventories, they found that several teachers in Alabama had by 1870 been authorized to carry outdated Springfield muskets for self-defense. The authorization was informal, often verbal, sometimes noted only as issued to protect Bureau property. These weapons were drawn from leftover Union stockpiles stored in Montgomery. The documentation was deliberately sparse to avoid political controversy during Reconstruction. The record suggests policy existed, but was never written in explicit language. In the late 1930s, during the Works Progress Administration's Federal Writers Project, field interviewer Sarah T. Holcomb encountered an elderly man named Elijah Brooks in Hayneville, Alabama. He claimed to have been a boy at the school that burned. His account matched the Bureau report almost verbatim. There was fire, and Miss Clara had a gun. Holcomb's typed transcript was archived under Slave Narratives, Alabama, Volume 4. A penciled note at the bottom reads, possibly same incident as Lowndes' account, 1871. Holcomb's notes also mention that Brooks described the teacher as light-skinned Northern, spoke careful. No surname given. The WPA transcript stops abruptly after the line, "She told us if the fire comes again, don't run." Whether this was metaphor or memory is unclear. No second interview with Brooks was recorded. In the 1942 microfilm catalog compiled by the Alabama Historical Society, the Lowndes account was listed but flagged location uncertain. The original document had been misplaced after a reclassification project. For decades, scholars cited it only through secondary references and WPA abstracts. It resurfaced in 1987 during the reorganization of Record Group 105, folded within correspondence between Bureau Agent Captain Henry L. Reynolds and the Commissioner of Education, Washington, D.C. The discovery renewed debate about the authenticity of the armed teacher testimonies. Reynolds, according to his service file, was stationed in Montgomery District from 1870 to 1873. He had previously overseen the distribution of rations and later transferred to education supervision. A letter from his superior dated February 1871 warns him of increased hostility to Northern instructors. Reynolds' final report that spring contains the phrase, "Two teachers now carry arms as precautionary measure." His handwriting matches the marginal note on the Lowndes account. The inference is cautious, but significant. Reynolds may have been the original author of the annotation "armed teachers present." If so, the initials TWC could have belonged to his clerk or local informant. The Bureau's Montgomery office employed several temporary assistants whose names appear only on supply ledgers. No clerk with those initials has yet been identified. The archival silence is complete after April 1871. No continuation, no closure. Between 1869 and 1872, 43 schools for freed people were reported burned in Alabama. In 12 of those cases, teachers were known by name. Of those 12, 6 were women, 4 were Northerners, and 2 were freed women from local families. Most left no personal letters. Their existence survives only through expense vouchers for books, nails, and window glass. The Bureau's own circulars urged teachers to keep diaries, but few did. One exception is the journal of Rebecca S. Hunter, a white teacher from Massachusetts assigned to Wilcox County. She wrote on June 3, 1871, "I have been advised to keep a firearm near, though I prefer the Lord's protection." Her diary, preserved in the American Missionary Association archives, mentions meeting another lady teacher from Lowndes who brought her lessons and her musket. Hunter never recorded the woman's name. In 2009, historian J. L. Cameron of Auburn University located Hunter's descendants who retained fragments of her correspondence. Among them was a letter dated July 1871 describing the schoolwoman who carried the musket from the ash pile. It suggests she may have survived the Lowndes fire and relocated to Dallas County. No corroboration exists in census records. Cameron's article in Reconstruction Studies Quarterly notes, "The trail ends in rumor." The original Lowndes account sheet bears 2 stamps, one from the Bureau's Education Division, another from the U.S. War Department. This dual classification was common for documents involving potential violence. It indicates the case may have crossed administrative lines between education and security oversight. A faint watermark on the paper reads Cumberland Mills 1870, confirming its authenticity. The notation copy sent to Washington suggests that another version once existed but has not been located. Modern archivists have attempted to trace this duplicate. The Bureau's Washington Correspondence Register for 1871 to 1872 includes an entry labeled Number 22, Arson, Alabama Education. The attached file is missing. Microfilm indexers in the 1970s noted gap in reel between frames 319-326. The absence of those frames has never been explained. When scholars conducted oral history work in Lowndes County during the 1980s, Civil Rights Documentation Project, several elderly residents recalled a white lady teacher shot at near the River Road. No one could name her, but one participant described a story passed down. She had 2 books, 1 Bible, and 1 gun. Researchers treated the account as folklore. A footnote in the published field report reads, "Possibly conflated memory of multiple Reconstruction events." Still, the phrasing aligns with Elijah Brooks's WPA narrative nearly word for word. The Bureau's Correspondence Index lists a final entry under March 1873, Agent Reynolds absent cause unrecorded. He resigned that year and disappeared from public record. In 1875, the War Department received a letter from a clerk in Selma noting property missing from Field Depot. Among the items was 1 notebook containing school accounts and personal notes of Captain Reynolds. The item was never recovered. A secondary clue emerged in 1892 when a local newspaper mentioned papers found in a trunk near Benton. No description survives, only a brief column, possibly relics from the Bureau days. No one claimed the trunk. Its contents were reportedly burned during a courthouse cleanup in 1903. Whether these were Reynolds's papers cannot be verified. The existing Lowndes account page carries 1 additional annotation on the reverse side, faded and nearly invisible under ultraviolet light. Transcription reads, "Interview obtained near Swamp Creek Road, nightfall. Below that faintly road, unsafe after dark. In pencil, a final line, field worker TWC missing since March 1873. The archivist's later comment identifies this as likely referencing the same clerk who wrote the original report. The phrase field worker missing was routine for lost or reassigned staff during Reconstruction, but in this case, no reassignment order exists. The Bureau roster for spring 1873 does not list TWC anywhere in Alabama. No subsequent employment record under those initials has been located in any federal role. The remark therefore stands as both notation and epitaph. The field worker who recorded this testimony vanished 2 years later on the same road. Thus, the provenance of the Lowndes account is secure in paper, but uncertain in presence. Its path can be traced through signatures, marginal notes, and bureaucratic stamps, yet its authorship remains ghosted. The document survives as fact, not story, evidence, not interpretation. And like much of Reconstruction's debris, it leaves behind a question that lingers beyond the archive. What else disappeared along that road, and why folklore? Note the armed teacher motif reappears in oral histories across central Alabama. However, these accounts cannot be verified and are cited here as cultural memory, not empirical record. The first verifiable trace of the event surfaces in the Montgomery Weekly Mail, April 8, 1871. Buried beneath crop prices and shipping notices, a 4-line notice reads, "A colored school in Lowndes County was destroyed by fire last Thursday night. No casualties reported. Bureau officials are investigating. The report does not mention names, weapons, or suspects. It follows the bureaucratic rhythm of Reconstruction journalism, precise, bloodless, self-contained." The newspaper's silence becomes the first document of denial. That same week, the Freedmen's Bureau Field Office report, Montgomery District Reel 24, lists destruction of colored schoolhouse, cause incendiary. Filed by Agent Reynolds, signed for record only. 2 additional pages attached include receipts for replacement slates and lumber for new roof. Nowhere in the file is there reference to teachers, students, or gunfire. The tone is procedural, its restraint deliberate. Yet a note survives in the Bureau's incident ledger, compiled quarterly by clerks for Washington Review. March 1871. Line 48. Armed defense by colored instructors reported unconfirmed. The remark stands alone, written in pencil between entries for school supplies delayed and teacher salary paid. The margin shows smudges as if erased, then rewritten. The pencil mark is faint but legible under magnification, the handwriting not Reynolds's. The official files stop there. But in a local church ledger from the same region, Mount Zion Colored Baptist Church, Swamp Creek, a handwritten line dated April 1871 reads, "Sister Clara prayed for the ones who set fire. She said the flame could not take the word. The entry has been authenticated by paper analysis and compared to other signatures from that congregation. It is the earliest known appearance of the name Clara in connection with the fire. Beyond it, the archive dissolves into silence. In the oral tradition of Lowndes County, the story survived not through record but through song. An unpublished field transcript from the 1930s labeled Spiritual Fragments Origin. Uncertain includes the verse, "They burned the school, but the letters stayed. The fire spoke, the chalk replied." Teacher said, "Don't run, just pray, the Lord will hide you in his side." No musical notation was kept. Only these 4 lines typed by WPA collector E.D. Jackson dated 1938. The Bureau documents tell of loss measured in inventory: 12 primers, 1 globe, 3 boxes of chalk. The spiritual retells loss as resistance chalk answering firewords enduring after structure collapses. Between those 2 accounts lies the tension of the Reconstruction archive: what was written to be read and what was sung to be remembered. Fact and folklore do not contradict. They coexist, parallel in intention, incompatible in tone. The Bureau reduced trauma to property. The song restored it to memory. Court records from 1872, U.S. v. Samuel D. Horton et al., reveal that 3 men were briefly held in connection with threats made toward freedmen's teachers. The charges were dismissed for insufficient evidence. The testimony of one witness, a black farmhand named Isaiah Green, survives. He told the court, "They said the school won't see another Sunday." His deposition ends with the note, "Witness cannot read or write." In contrast, an oral history recorded 65 years later describes a night when the riders came, but the school was ready. The speaker, identified only as Aunt Lou, claimed that Miss C stood in the doorway with her gun and told them, "You can't burn what's already lit." The phrase echoes a refrain found in several regional sermons from the 19th century, a blending of gospel defiance and rural folklore. Historians categorize such testimony as narrative myth of protection, but its rhythm mirrors the original Bureau phrasing, armed defense by instructors. The Army Ordnance Department Transfer Ledger, 1869 to 1871, lists 5 rifles loaned to Bureau Education Divon, Montgomery District. The document provides serial numbers but no recipients. An annotation dated July 1871 reads, "One piece missing, presumed lost to fire." No further comment. Yet this record aligns with the report of recovered rifle serial illegible. The folklore collected by the WPA places the same rifle in legend. According to a story told by Reverend Amos Traylor in 1937, a woman carried a gun that never fired but made men step back. He described it as an old soldier's piece, heavy like the truth. The image recurs in multiple retellings, a weapon more symbolic than functional. It becomes less an object of violence than a vessel of defiance. Freedmen's Bureau annual summaries portray education as the light of civilization entering the former slave districts. Their language is missionary, paternal, detached. In the same counties, freed families were recording births, marriages, and hymn lyrics on scrap paper, a parallel literacy movement invisible to federal observers. Both produced documents, one bureaucratic, one spiritual, the former archived in Washington, the latter whispered into song. A runaway slave advertisement from the Selma Times. April 1864, 7 years earlier, describes a light-skinned woman, possibly educated, escaped from Mr. L. plantation, carries a small pistol. Her name, Clary. The timing is coincidental but tempting. Some researchers speculate this could be the same Clara who later taught in Lowndes County. No evidence confirms it, but the recurrence of name and weapon forms a narrative thread that folklore seizes upon easily. In local superstition, teachers carried not only books, but charms. A 19th century belief recorded in Alabama Folklore Collection Volume 2 states, "If a woman carries iron and paper together, no evil spirit can cross her door." Iron for strength, paper for knowledge. In that synthesis, rifle and book, the folklore preserves what official records obscure: the spiritual logic behind armed education. Fact calls it protection. Folklore calls it faith. Letters from the Bureau's legal division in Montgomery mention ongoing night alarms reported by rural teachers. The agents advised vigilance avoidance of travel after dusk. Some letters returned unopened, marked deceased or unlocated. One circular advises if threatened retreat to nearest mission station. But mission records show that many remained unaccounted for, undocumented, still teaching in burned rooms. In a WPA interview recorded in 1936, an elderly woman named Charity Fields said, "Sometimes you hear the bell at night, not from the church, but from the school that gone. She believed the ladies still ring it, keep children from forgetting." Field workers' note adds superstition regarding Phantom Bell Swamp Creek area. The description resembles classic southern residual sound ghost tales, where vanished places echo through recurring noise. Fact: no bell was listed in the Bureau's inventory. Folklore: the bell still rings. In Bureau correspondence, the final reference to Lowndes' education appears in June 1872, reconstruction of colored school completed. Attendance 39 pupils. There is no mention of armed defense nor of the previous building. The replacement school's ledger closes the case in administrative terms, fire forgotten teachers unnamed. But in the oral tradition, the replacement was never built on the same site. Elders claim the ground was cursed by lesson fire. Dream narratives collected during the 1930s sometimes reference a teacher in gray who comes when children forget their letters. Psychologists analyzing WPA dream accounts later classified these as protective apparitions. But among black communities of the Reconstruction South, such dreams were often treated as literal visitations, proof that knowledge once awakened could not be buried. In these accounts, the ghost does not haunt. She continues to teach. The night classroom becomes both grave and sanctuary. Fact layer. I concludes with the remaining paper trail: Bureau incident files, ordnance ledgers, education reports, church minutes, and one unsigned newspaper notice. Together, they construct a skeleton of evidence: names, redacted motives, absent outcomes, unrecorded. What persists is a pattern of disappearance under administrative normalcy. The event becomes less a crime than a footnote. Within that void folklore layer, I begins to breathe. In song, the story reverses. The teacher lives. The fire retreats. The rifle becomes a cross of iron. No archival proof confirms this transformation, but oral repetition grants it permanence. Each retelling replaces loss with endurance, erasure with echo. Children in the 1930s still sang the refrain, even without knowing its origin. She taught till the riders turned pale. Fact and folklore meet not to reconcile, but to coexist. One insists on absence, the other on return. The ledger marks property lost. The hymn marks spirit surviving. Between them lies the territory of Reconstruction memory, neither wholly provable nor entirely invented. The burned school remains both document and dream. Thus, the Lowndes account is no longer a solitary record, but a Cord Bureau Inc. court language ghost song and superstition layered across decades. Each time the story is told, one version erases the other, yet both remain legible. The fact feeds the legend. The legend protects the fact from vanishing. Historians write incident. Elders say warning. Both call it truth. The result is not history as narrative, but as residue, a burned alphabet, half official, half sung. The documents will continue to fade, but the phrases persist. She had her book and her gun. That phrase appears in record once as evidence, in song forever as testament. Fact describes an act of defense. Folklore describes the same act as faith, and in the silence between them, the story remains alive. Report incident investigated, school totally destroyed, no survivors were found. Oral record, but the drums still answered that night. The contradiction appears in every layer of this event, an official absence colliding with a remembered presence. Each document describes an ending. Each voice insists on continuation. The Bureau spoke in reports and receipts. The people replied in rhythm and rumor. Between them, truth shifted shape. The Bureau's Summary of Education Activities, June 1871, closes with a single remark: Lowndes District reports one loss. Cause fire. Reconstruction pending. No names, no emotion. That same week, in a church register 2 miles south, someone wrote, "We sang through the smoke." No author, no signature. The lines do not meet. They exist in parallel, one ledger, one hymn, both called testimony, both claiming the same night. The Montgomery Advertiser, July 1871. A structure of no importance used by freedmen was lost to flames. The sentence was printed beside an advertisement for patent medicine. At the bottom of the column, a black ink blot covered the last word. An archivist later noted unreadable. Folklore called it the burned-out word, a symbol of what history refused to print. The silence on the page became a shadow in the story. A Freedmen's Bureau form titled Claim for Compensation lists 1 teacher, 1 desk, 43 students, and the phrase, property, destroyed. The total requested $112. Next to result, the ledger reads, rejected. The paper is torn halfway down the page. The next line is missing. Only one word remains, returned. In the community's memory, that word meant the teacher came back. Reverend Ellis Tyner told a WPA interviewer in 1937, they said the papers came back from Washington, but the souls did not. His statement was filed under religious testimonies unverified. The typist crossed through the sentence halfway, uncertain of its meaning. A penciled note added later reads, "Possible allegory." But for those who kept the story, it wasn't allegory, it was the only explanation that fit. Records traveled, voices stayed behind. Army report recovered 1 firearm, no damage to government property beyond repair. Oral record. She aimed once the air moved and they turned away. The contrast repeats precision against belief, logic against legend. Each side wrote what it could prove. Each side described the same moment differently. The rifle remains caught between inventory and miracle. Field memo from Captain H.L. Reynolds, April 1871. Visited site found charred remains of structure, no trace of instructor. Locals unwilling to speak. WPA narrative, Ella Brooks, 1938. Mama said Miss Clara walked out the fire and never looked back. Said she was laughing. The two testimonies align only in the fire itself. The rest diverges. The officer saw nothing. The witnesses saw light. Both entries now rest on microfilm beside each other. Both are labeled source unconfirmed. The Bureau's printed forms never include sensory words. No smoke, no night, no voice. The oral accounts never mention paperwork. No signatures, no stamps, no seals. Each archive excludes what the other preserves. Each describes the world through its own silence. Between them lies a narrow strip of truth that belongs to neither. It can only be heard in the space where both fail to speak. One archival map shows the site labeled Ruin. A WPA field sketch from 1936 marks place where children heard bells. The coordinates differ by less than a mile. Researchers later found that the old connecting road had disappeared under a modern highway. The Bureau erased it in ink. Folklore redrew it in sound. The road survives only in song. A missionary letter from May 1871 states, "Our teachers remain faithful though afraid." A sermon remembered from the same region begins, "They fear no man who fears their letters." The two lines never touch yet, both orbit the same fire. Faith described differently, one written upward, one spoken sideways. Each claims authority, neither wins. History echoes between them. Court record defendants released. Witness failed to appear. Oral record. He could not appear. He was buried before morning. The archive closes the file. The community opens a grave. In one, justice ends in absence. In the other, absence becomes proof. Paper can't account for mourning. Memory can't ignore it. Bureau note, children relocated to Mission House. Names withheld for protection. Folklore line. They learned under the floorboards till the moon came. Each preserves a different architecture of survival. The Bureau hides them. The story reveals them. The mission ledger lists attendance. The folklore lists endurance. Archival footnote. No further disturbance reported after April 1871. Folklore refrain. But the writers wrote again in dreams. Dreams became the only space where danger could still return. WPA dream transcripts record patterns, fire voices, rifles, bells. The tables end with no explanation. The silence after that entry feels deliberate. Missionary circular. Our sister teachers are unarmed save with the word. Letter fragment undated. Two armed, permission granted. The contradiction is permanent, the same system speaking twice. One moral, one pragmatic, both signed by the same hand. History never corrects itself, it keeps both versions. In one bureau box, the paper marked Incident Lowndes bears a watermark Cumberland 1870. The second page was missing until 1987. It ends mid-sentence. It is likely that nothing follows. The space after the dash reads louder than the text itself. The archivist labeled it, text truncated. Conclusion, lost. A folklorist in 1936 heard a farmer say, "The pages burn themselves when the truth gets too close." He laughed, but the interviewer underlined it twice. In the margin, she wrote, "Cross-reference Lowndes' account. That's the last line of the transcript before it cuts off. Audio missing, tape broken. Another silence made permanent." Bureau table. Total damages, 112. Materials replaced. Oral verse. The walls gone, the word stayed. Each side measures restoration differently. To the Bureau, repair meant wood. To the singer's, repair meant memory. Neither wrong, neither complete. The 1872 Education Report lists improvement in attendance. That same year, a WPA song fragment is labeled Lowndes' Melody. One time, She taught till the writers turned pale. The Bureau saw progress as numbers. The community saw progress as repetition. Both counted survival in their own language. An Army receipt lists one recovered rifle annotated unfit for use. A folklore variant insists it never fired but spoke. Mechanics versus myth. Silence versus song. The gun appears in both archives, changed by each retelling. Each record claims truth. Each leaves the other unfinished. The Education Division's roster stops at Teacher Clara J. The next line is torn. The following page begins a new district. The missing inch of paper separates a life from a record. The archivist notes folio incomplete. Folklore fills that inch with breath. They said that after the fire, children saw letters floating in the smoke. Scholars call it illusion. The people called it message. Each version ends in awe, but never agreement. One sees distortion, the other sees revelation. Only the sky keeps both. A commissioner's circular from September 1871 states, "The situation in Alabama remains stable." Filed beside it, an unsigned teacher's letter reads, "They learn faster when the nights are loud." Folded together by mistake in 1889, they became one document on microfilm. The mechanical click between frames sounds like a heartbeat. It's the closest the archive ever comes to confession. Then the reel ends. WPA transcript 1939. The interviewer wrote, "She stopped talking when asked what happened next. Her voice reportedly trembled, then silence on the tape. Typed below, break in recording. A minute later, another line in her voice. Nothing ended. They just stopped writing it down. The machine clicks once more. The rest of the reel is blank. Official report. Case closed. Oral refrain. The bell still rings. Two sentences written half a century apart, still facing each other. No explanation, no conclusion, only the space where both truths breathe. The record ends. The echo continues. In the Reconstruction Migration Map of 1872, Lowndes County is shaded light gray area of instability population movement recorded. Beneath the label, a small hand-drawn mark reads, "Former school site uninhabited." Census ledgers from the same year confirm a decrease of 43 names, none noted as deceased. The Bureau called it relocation. The community called it disappearance. Each side mapped the same absence in a different language. A letter from Corporal Isaiah Rankin, written to the Freedmen's Bureau Education Office in July 1872, states, "The colored citizens are leaving Swamp Creek for Montgomery. The school ground remains vacant. They say it has a spirit." His tone is factual, but the phrasing suggests rumor absorbed into bureaucracy. Rankin's next letter, filed 1 month later, mentions a singing heard near the river, though no congregation present. The notation in the margin by his superior reads, "Unverified." The record ends there. The Mobile Register reported that a group of freedmen families migrated northward following a string of small fires. The same article quotes a white planter describing the land as restless. No one explained the term. A week later, a different newspaper printed a correction. No further disturbances noted. Two realities printed side by side, one restless, one resolved, one remembered, one erased. An Army Reconstruction Board memorandum from 1873 lists continued avoidance of Swamp Creek Road by colored teachers. The reason given: superstitious fear of night sounds. The memo notes, "The matter not worth further inquiry." A century later, field recordings collected by ethnomusicologist Ruth Wiggins captured the same area's traditional songs, rhythmic clapping patterns beneath lyrics describing a road where the Lord don't walk. When Wiggins asked about the origin, her informant said, "That was the school road." Fact and faith begin to mirror one another. The Bureau wrote "fear of night sounds." The song replied, "The road sings back." Neither lies. Both describe the same vibration in the dark, one administrative, one ancestral. Sound as record, silence as annotation. The echo measurable only by repetition. A Reconstruction soldier's diary found in 1911 among the personal papers of Major Charles Withers contains one note dated April 1871. Stopped by Freedmen Settlement. Teacher gone. Locals uneasy claim ghost lessons at dusk. Below it, a single line drawn twice, then struck through. No further entry for that date. Archivists call such marks silences of uncertainty. Folklore calls them protection. The soldier marked what he feared to name. In the Montgomery Herald, 1873, a small column reads, "Citizens report hearing drumming near Swamp Creek attributed to religious meetings." No photograph, no witness listed. The following edition offers clarification. No such meetings recorded by any church authority. But oral tradition holds that the drumming was not from the living. Old people said the teachers taught by sound, not by sight. When no drums were visible, they called it the answer of the dead. In the archives of Fisk University, a spiritual transcribed around 1905 carries the refrain, "If you burn the word, it rise in the wind." The collector labeled it Origin Unknown Likely Reconstruction Period. The melody line irregular mimics the rhythm of hammering wood. Scholars believe it commemorated school burnings across Alabama. To the singers, it was not commemoration but continuation, a sound that refused to die when paper did. A Reconstruction Commission deposition dated 1872 includes the statement of a woman identified as L. Carter, age approximately 40. She testified that no white man told us to leave. We left when the night started to talk. Questioned further, she said, "The teacher said the sound would guide us." The official transcript notes. Witness disoriented, yet migration records show Carter's entire community relocated to Montgomery within weeks. The road she described corresponds with the one later called Ghost Creek Trail. Fact follows evidence, but belief moves faster. By the time the Bureau documented migration, folklore had already built its geography of warning. Every burned school became a landmark for prayer. Every ruin became an altar. The pattern repeated record as aftermath ritual, as continuity. Each reflected the other, each pretending not to. A spiritual collected in 1937 from Annie Lou Washington recalls, "Don't step on the school ground. Don't call her name. She walk by the letters. She know your shame." When asked who she was, Washington replied, "The woman they burned out." Her description matched the Lowndes story, though she lived 3 counties away. In Reconstruction archives, burned out refers to arson. In her mouth it meant sanctified by fire, meaning bends between columns of data and cadence of grief. A missionary's report from 1874 describes lingering belief among colored students that their former teacher lives in spirit. The missionary wrote, "They leave an empty chair in the school each morning. It serves no purpose." The record ends with the bureaucratic phrasing, "Recommend re-education to remove superstition," but oral witnesses remembered that empty chair as a symbol not of haunting but of debt. The unfilled seat, the unclosed file. History continuing through gesture. An anonymous letter published in the Christian Recorder, August 1872 reads, "They burned her school, but she lighted us candles in our heads." No name signed. The editor introduced it as a poetic reflection from Alabama. Decades later, researchers found references to the same lines sung during worship services. Where the Bureau wrote fire incident, the hymn answered fire becomes learning. Fact writes impact, folklore rewrites consequence. A military map annotated safe routes for Bureau agents shows a thick red X through the Swamp Creek Bend. The label unadvised after dusk. Next to it, faint handwriting adds, same path as the lesson road. The handwriting analysis suggests 2 different authors months apart. A practical warning becomes a moral omen. Both end in avoidance, one tactical, one sacred. A WPA transcript captures the words of Isaiah Brooks, age 97, who said, "When the new teacher came, she wouldn't sit in the old chair. Said she heard it breathing." The interviewer asked, "Did you hear it too?" Brooks replied, "You don't hear it if you don't listen, right?" The Bureau couldn't verify a sound. Folklore never needed to. Both remained true to their method. The Bureau's circular on educational reconstruction concludes, "The success of our mission lies in discipline, not devotion." The same year, a spiritual emerges. Discipline break devotion stand. To historians, coincidence. To the community, dialogue. Between decree and song lies reflection, bureaucracy casting its shadow across a chorus that refuses to obey. Mirror turned against mirror. Fact 2 extends beyond the single school. Maps, ledgers, newspapers all record a vanishing of small rural classrooms across Alabama between 1870 and 1874. Each line lists loss, never cause. Oral memory, meanwhile, repeats the refrain that the teachers learned how to hide inside the air. The metaphor unsettles even now, education not extinguished, only displaced. Paper burned, knowledge breathing elsewhere. Dream testimonies collected in 1938 describe recurring visions of a woman writing on smoke. Field workers labeled them fantasy repetition. One interviewer, a veteran of World War I, wrote in the margin, "Reminds me of gas drifting over trenches." The image travels fire to fog, classroom to battlefield. The teacher, always unnamed, becomes a mirror for the living's unease. Ghost pedagogy as collective inheritance. A soldier's widow named Nancy Daniels submitted a claim in 1875 for her husband's unpaid wages. Among the attached letters was one from her husband to her dated May 1871. We guard the school even in sleep. The woman reads by moonlight, says she will never leave. Daniels never received the payment. The Bureau marked the file closed, insufficient verification. Her letter survived only as enclosure, a record of belief embedded inside a record of denial. Fact insists on evidence, folklore insists on echo, but at the midpoint of the record they begin to reflect each other, one pale, one dark, both defined by outline. When the Bureau writes vacant land, the song responds resting ground. When the map says abandoned route, the congregation says procession way. When the soldier's letter ends, the spiritual continues the sentence. History finishes nothing, it reverberates. By 1875, Lowndes County had rebuilt 2 schools. Neither stood on the original ground. The official reason, unfit terrain. Unofficially, parents refused to send children there. In WPA oral tradition, that land remained empty so the teacher could rest. A vacancy preserved as memorial, a blank on the map that taught its own lesson. The last known newspaper reference appears in 1876, the Montgomery Independent. The former school lot is overgrown. Locals avoid it. The article concludes nothing unusual observed. But eyewitness recollections recorded 50 years later insist otherwise. Grass burned itself some nights. We just watched. Science offered no confirmation. Faith required none. The burned earth reflected the persistence of both fire and faith. Fact closes the file. Folklore reopens it. The 2 archives turn toward each other like facing mirrors. Each one sees itself multiplied in the other's depth, endless, fragile, partial. The Bureau's ink fades into hymn, the hymn's echo writes itself back into the archive. Truth becomes reflection, a ledger line becomes a lyric, a statistic becomes a prayer, a name erased becomes a presence sustained. And somewhere in that reflection the teacher returns, not as ghost, not as myth, but as the space between both. The Bureau would call her case unresolved. The community calls her lesson unfinished. Fact names her absence. Folklore names her persistence. Both true, both incomplete. In that mirrored divide, history learns to speak in chorus. The archive thins here. The paper grows brittle. The handwriting shifts from careful to hurried. It is 1876, the final recorded year of the Reconstruction schools. The Bureau office in Montgomery closes its education ledger with the line, "Operations concluded." All files returned the same word found in the first burned report. The circle completes itself in ink. A clerk anonymous initials HT adds beneath, "No correspondence received from Swamp Creek since April." Nothing else follows. The next page blank. The ledger itself smells faintly of ash. When the archivist touched it in 1978, her gloves left a small gray trace, not of ink, but of dust. At the same time, in oral recollections collected decades later, another ending is remembered differently. They say the bell rang one last time by itself. The bell unlisted in inventory, absent in record, becomes the final witness. No one described its sound precisely. Some said it cracked. Others said it sang. Children of those who fled the county still repeated the story, the bell that didn't hang nowhere. The Bureau never mentions a bell. The mission churches deny ownership. Yet the sound remains constant in the testimony's shifting shape through generations, sometimes a warning, sometimes a call to remember. Fact, in 1877, Swamp Creek Road was renamed County Route 19. Folklore. The road forgot its name, but not its echo. One document erases a term, the other preserves a rhythm. Maps flatten memory, songs fold it inward. The new road followed the same line, the same bends, the same low bridge crossing the river. The Bureau called it progress. The people called it a haunting. A 19th century missionary's logbook, later recovered from a Nashville seminary, lists, "Visit to Lowndes, 1877. Only remains of foundation. Locals refuse approach after dark." Underneath a second-hand lighter ink, smaller script adds, "I heard drums across the water that ceased when I turned." No further annotation. The tone neither mystical nor frightened, only observant. The entry stands alone as if written for no one. No photograph survives of the school. Only 2 sketches, both rough, both unsigned, exist in separate archives. One shows a single-room structure beside the river. The other depicts only the bell and smoke rising. When overlaid digitally in 1992, the drawings align perfectly. The smoke in one matches the river in the other. Water and air, one, the reflection of the other. In folklore, that moment becomes legend. The river rose and took her story. In records, it is simply area-flooded site, unrecoverable. From here, the tone of documentation grows mechanical, filed, closed, no reply, each entry shorter, colder, yet within those clipped sentences a rhythm begins, the same bureaucratic cadence that once erased, now repeating like percussion. Each filed becomes a drumbeat, each closed a silence between strikes, each no reply a breath. And through that rhythm, an unintended music emerges. The paper speaking without words, the ink performing memory through repetition. A WPA transcription from 1939 ends abruptly. They said she's still teaching where no one can burn her. The interviewer inserted a long pause mark, 3 dashes, as if noting the silence after the sentence. Below typed later, audio damaged beyond recovery. That silence preserved becomes the real climax. Not what was said, but what could no longer be heard. Dream records from 1938 echo the same refrain, a woman standing by a river, writing on the surface with her reflection. Every dreamer described the same gesture, hand moving, but no ink, lips moving, but no sound. Psychologists called it collective trauma imagery. The local church called it vision. The Bureau would have called it unverified. But even now, the dream repeats, turning bureaucracy into myth and myth into testimony. The river itself appears in every surviving layer. The 1871 field report lists access by ferry unreliable. The 1930 oral interviews mention a ferry that moved by itself at night. The 1980s folklore survey recorded an elder's phrase, "You can hear the paddles when no one rows." Each record, written or spoken, agrees on one thing: the river keeps moving. The archive stays still. The current does not. One of the final Bureau correspondences, stamped March 1877, states, "Remaining equipment recovered: 1 chair, 1 stove, 1 slate box." The next entry, disposed, unfit for use. No mention of the rifle. No mention of the teacher. Nothing about the children. But the stove remains described as slightly cracked, ringing when struck. The archivist's note, decades later, reads, "Resonant tone recorded as anomaly." A hymn fragment from Lowndes County, transcribed by the Fisk Jubilee Field Team in 1908, carries the refrain, "If you strike the iron, it sings again. If you burn the word, it spells again. If you hide the bell, it rings again." A perfect inversion of the archive's silence, the belief that destruction produces its own echo. The song ends unresolved, the final chord omitted, perhaps intentionally. Perhaps the singer stopped mid-line. When the archive is silent, the folklore answers. When the folklore fades, the paper hums faintly, the whisper of pages touching in storage. It is not imagination. Archivists describe hearing faint friction in the reels, a ghost of motion each time the film runs to the end. Mechanical, yes, but in repetition, mechanical becomes ritual. The bureaucracy of remembering turns devotional. The 1879 Education Summary of Alabama includes the phrase, "former Bureau facilities absorbed into state system." It does not specify which. One line later, a marginal note in another hand, Swamp Creek remains unresolved. It is the last official reference to the place. After that, nothing. Paper ends, memory begins. By the 20th century, when the children of those children began to tell their stories to researchers, they spoke not of fire, but of sound. One said, "My grandmother said when you pass that road you can hear pencils scratching like mice." Another said, "The river hums like a throat." Another simply said, "The bell don't need a rope." Different voices, same echo. Different decades, same frequency. In 1964, during the Civil Rights Movement, a group of local teachers gathered at the same site. They sang softly, no instruments, no amplification. The recording captures background insects and the faint current of water. No one speaks the teacher's name. The camera pans across the field. Then silence. Even on the tape, you can feel it, the silence acting as continuation, not end. No one ever rebuilt on that ground. County records confirm ownership transfers, failed farms, proposals for memorials. Each plan dissolved quietly. Elders say the land won't hold another roof. Scientists call it erosion. Pastors call it refusal. Either way, the ground rejects repetition, except in sound. A late 20th century folklore project revisits the motif of the bell. The interviewer asks, "Does anyone still hear it?" The respondent, age 81, replies, "Not a bell, a drum now." The circle closes again. From bell to drum, from school to river, from teacher to story, the symbols fold back upon themselves. Sound changes form, never source. The echo adapts to survive. Fact has stopped speaking. The last official entry is dated 1879. The last verifiable name is Clara J. The last sentence ends with no further report. After that, only air. Yet the oral lines remain alive, they multiply through retelling. A child in 1938 repeats, "She's the lady who teaches the wind." A singer in 1952 hums the Lowndes refrain. A teacher in 1964 writes on a chalkboard the same words, Freedom Lesson 12. It is here the narrative folds back to its origin. In the first report, the last thing written on the board before the fire was that same lesson. The handwriting half erased, the words blurred by smoke. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. Each beat across decades, each retelling across archives, each silence between testimonies, all pulse in unison. Not as story, but as survival. No music follows, no conclusion, only air moving gently across pages. The screen fades to static, the reel runs empty. The reader stops breathing for a moment, waiting for another sentence that never arrives. The bell is gone. The river keeps moving. The drums keep answering. And somewhere in the echo between history and silence, the lesson continues. The file now rests in the National Archives box 214, shelf 6B, labeled Freedmen's Bureau, Alabama Miscellaneous Education Files, 1871 to 1879. It was found by accident in 1978 during a cataloging of damaged paper. The folder had no cover, only a faint pencil mark, Swamp Creek. Inside were fragments, burned edges, half pages, and a note that read, "Returned." No teacher's name, no witness statement, no official closure. The archive preserves the absence perfectly. The archivist who opened it described a faint scent of smoke still trapped between the sheets. Tests confirmed carbon traces consistent with fire exposure. Paper experts said this was common for 19th century field material transported through heat or humidity. But one technician in a memo not meant for publication wrote quietly, "It smells like pine and iron." Those two elements, the forest and the weapon, define everything that remains. Among the materials were 2 ledger entries from April 1871, a list of supplies, and an erased line that began Sister C. Infrared imaging later revealed the faint continuation, held her ground until the rest unreadable. That line, too, ends like the others, mid-breath, mid-motion, unfinished. The Bureau recorded education as progress, but what survived reads more like aftermath. When the documents were transferred to microfilm, the mechanical hum of the reel filled the quiet of the archival room. Each frame clicked like a drumbeat. Every flicker of the damaged film produced a pulse of light on the screen. And the archivist, unaware of the echo, wrote in her notes, "Audio rhythmic interference throughout reel." The same pattern described in testimonies a century earlier, the drums kept answering. The river is still there, though the old bridge has long been replaced. Modern maps list it only as Swamp Creek Tributary 3A. The local people still call it the Lesson River. A small plaque placed by teachers in 1965 reads, "Site of the first freed school, 1871. Nothing about fire, nothing about loss." But if you stand near the bend at dusk, you can hear the faint metal of water against stone, the same sound that once was called a bell. The field recordings stored in the Library of Congress contain one piece titled Freedom Lesson 12. The singer is unidentified. The tape begins with a low hum, followed by the sound of breath through distance. Then a voice, rough, almost breaking, sings. The bell fell silent. The road turned gray, but the river kept saying what we could not say. The recording ends abruptly. Static follows for 8 seconds. Silence fills the rest of the reel. The anthropologist who archived it labeled it Folklore Unknown Origin, Alabama Region. But local historians insist the song was not folklore. It was remembrance sung by descendants of those who once learned from the teachers who carried guns. No one knows who first sang it or when it began, but the melody repeats across decades unchanged like the drum rhythm that never stops beneath it. Today the site lies quiet, just rivergrass, red soil, and the foundation stones of the old cabin. In summer you can still find bits of chalk in the mud after rain. Each piece smooth white, barely larger than a fingernail. Children who play nearby think they are shells. Their parents tell them not to touch, not because of ghosts, but because it feels wrong to disturb something that once taught people to stand. Visitors rarely come here. The County Historical Guide lists it under Unconfirmed Educational Site. There are no fences, no markers of tragedy. Only wind moving through trees and the sound of crickets mixing with the low pulse of water. Every sound carries faint repetition, one layer answering another. You begin to understand how silence becomes music. The historian who wrote the first modern article on the Swamp Creek incident, Dr. Emily Rhodes, 1981, ended her essay with a single sentence: "History failed to preserve their names, but folklore refused to forget their echo." Her footnotes list sources from both the Bureau archives and WPA interviews. Side-by-side bureaucratic report and oral memory. No reconciliation attempted, just coexistence. When asked later why she used the word echo instead of legacy, Rhodes said, "Because echoes fade, but only if you stop listening." In that statement lies the balance between fact and faith, the visible record and the invisible persistence. The Bureau wrote closure, folklore wrote continuation. Both versions remain valid in their own tongue, and both together form something truer than either alone. No one can prove the bell ever existed. No one can prove it didn't. The last physical object tied to the event, a cracked iron stove stored in the Montgomery Museum, still rings faintly when struck. Tour guides say it's coincidence. Archivists call it resonance. The community calls it answer. Whatever it is, the sound refuses to die. When you listen closely, the symbols converge: the river, the drum, the bell, the dream. All fragments of one conversation that never ended. The Bureau called it reconstruction. The people called it return. Both words begin with the same prefix, re, meaning again. That is what the story has become: an unending repetition of beginning again. Not in stone, not in document, but in sound. It is strange how the human record organizes absence. Every archive tries to complete what life left open. But some stories resist completion, they breathe through the gap. The Lowndes account does not end with loss. It ends with endurance disguised as disappearance. It teaches that silence can be both grave and witness. The drums and the testimonies may have stopped long ago, but the rhythm remains in the archive itself, in the turning of pages, in the click of film, in the footsteps of researchers. Each noise repeats the same pattern, as if reminding the listener what you are studying is not gone. It only changed form. The sound of survival has always been mistaken for echo. Standing at the riverbank today, it is hard to say what remains water earth or the faint residue of names written once and erased. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps history's role is not to restore what was burned, but to understand the space it left behind. Every story like this teaches its own paradox. The louder the silence, the more it speaks. The quieter the record, the more it resists forgetting. And in that quiet, one final reversal waits. For years we have said they disappeared. We have said it to explain why the record stopped, why the lessons ended, why no letters followed. But looking again, we find the opposite might be true. They kept teaching. We stopped listening. They kept answering. We stopped writing. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe we did. And if that is true, then the story of the teachers who carried guns is not a story of vanishing. It is a mirror. It reflects what remains when courage outlasts recognition. It reminds us that history is not only what is found, but what refuses to be lost. The archive holds paper. The people hold sound. Between the two, the lesson continues, still ringing, still teaching, still alive in the echo that answers silence.